morning. Sorry we're a few minutes late. Welcome to Polaris Live, conversations on the U.S.-China relationship and its global impact as seen through the eyes of experts from around the world. This user-supported channel is brought to you live in conjunction with the Foreign Policy Association of New York. Viewers may ask questions using the bar on the right-hand side of the screen. The upcoming United States presidential elections are being called the most important signal for the future direction of U.S. domestic and foreign policy in generations. Throughout this autumn, we will invite a select group of international experts to offer their views on the American elections and how countries around the world, especially China, are preparing for their outcome. This is your host, Sarwar Kashmiri, and my guest today is Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar, who joins us from Jakarta, Indonesia. Dewi Fortuna Anwar straddles the world of academia, political activism, and government. She is a research professor at the Research Center for Politics, National Research and Innovation Agency, generally known as PRP-BRIN. She has written widely on Indonesia's foreign policy, Indonesia's democratization, as well as on ASEAN and regional political and security issues. She's been visiting professor at some of the leading universities around the world. Welcome back to Polaris Live, Professor Anwar. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Thank you very much for having me back, Sarah.
Sorry we ran into some technical issues and delayed. But we're on our way, and this is one of the most important programs that we are going to do in this autumn. What I want to ask you right away is China's been ramping up its manufacturing investment in Indonesia, from leading companies such as the largest electric car maker BYD. But we also read about the Indonesian Navy forcing Chinese Coast Guard vessels out of its waters. What's this all about, Dewi?
Well, it's true that Indonesia's economic relations with China have been very close. China has been the largest trading partner, one of the largest investor. But at the same time, we also know that China has claimed the South China Sea in its entirety. It has this so-called 9-dash line or 10-dash line, which impinges on the many exclusive economic zones of the Southeast Asian countries. Based on UNCLOS 1982, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, China has some waters rights based on UNCLOS, but certainly not the entire South China Sea area. So China has come into conflicts with a number of Southeast Asian countries. Indonesia is not really a claimant to the features in the South China Sea or in the Straddles, for example. Indonesia is not a claimant. But China's shipping vessels, China's coast guards have sometimes gone into waters which are within the Indonesian exclusive economic zones. And this is what had happened recently. And this is not the first one. It has happened even during President Jokowi's time. And I don't know why it happened just as President Prabowo took over, whether China was testing the new government resolve. But apparently, China's ships had bothered the Indonesian exploration. You know, there was the Indonesian oil company Pertamina is looking for oils in the exclusive economic zones, which in fact is, recognized as the EEZ of Indonesia under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea.
Yes. So
regardless of the good relations on the economy, when it comes to protecting Indonesia's territory, including, the waters that it has sovereign rights over, such as the EEZ, I think the Indonesian government has been consistent. This is not the first time it has chased Chinese ships out of its areas.
So it doesn't, first of all, they probably wish now that they'd picked on someone other than your new president, who was a general in the army, as I recall. But leaving that aside, it sounds like these are handleable issues, Professor Anwar, right? These are not make or break relations kinds of issues that you're able to move them out and they test and so on. Am I correct in that?
Yes and no. I mean, is China wants to leverage its economic influence over what Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Brunei regard as their rights, according to the UNCLOS 1982. I don't think that would go well.
Right.
So we would like China to respect international law,
Yes.
UNCLOS 1982. China is a signatory of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, 1982, but it is not respecting it. And when it comes to the issues of the law of the sea, Indonesia, as you know, its territories, the fact that Indonesia is recognized an archipelagic state is in fact according to UNCLOS 1982. For
Yes.
us, it's the constitution of the sea. On that issue, Indonesia will not budge, no matter how friendly relation with Beijing. It will not allow China to continue to impinge on our sovereign rights and to continue to violate UNCLOS 1982. So Sawa, it doesn't follow economic friendliness on one side, but when it comes to territories, even within ASEAN countries continue to have some unresolved territorial boundaries, but it doesn't mean that we have to go to war over it. So, so if China continues to send its ships, I think Indonesia will continue to chase them out.
Well, it's interesting when I talk or speak at American military institutions, this issue of America not ratifying the Law of the Seas Treaty comes up. And the point is always made by American senior officials that, America may not have ratified the Law of the Sea Treaty, but we always follow it. And China has ratified it, but doesn't follow it. So it's just a very interesting international geopolitical issue, Devi. So I would thank you for helping us clarify that. Now, Indonesia is the largest economy in Southeast Asia, and it's not surprising that China would want to invest and take part of it. Is China's investment in its economy being matched by the United States?
Well, China is a newcomer, so and its investment lately has been very, very dominant, particularly in infrastructure. The United States has been a long-term investor in Indonesia. In oil and gas, it's primarily still a lot of oil companies. The United States is also very, very active in the service sector. But when it comes to infrastructure, clearly, the United States is not really playing such a large part, such a large role. So there is a perception that U.S. investment is less than China, but I'm not really sure whether, if we really count all the investment that the U.S. has, including in oil and gas and mining, that this is really that far beyond China. But the optic is that the U.S. investment is not matching China, but when you look at the infrastructure development. But as I said, the U.S. has been a long-term player, and it's very much private sector led. So it is not as easy to compile, to say matching it apple to apple.
Well, that's really important to know, because some quarters in America, Professor Anwar, say, China has the BRI, America should be stepping up and doing that. So it's really important for us to know, America to know, and people to know that it has been a long-term relationship and continues in slightly different areas than China. You had a presidential election recently. Tell us a bit about the new president.
Well, the new president, as you know, is someone who is not terribly new in the political scene. General Prabowo, coming from a very prominent family, economist family. His father was a major architect of the New Order economic policy. He's the son of Professor Sumitro Johadikusumo, who is a very prominent economist. But Prabowo is better known as the son-in-law of President Suharto. And he was very, he was married for a while and has a son, with one of the daughters of President Suharto. And Prabowo is also a high-ranking military officer, an army officer in the military under the New Order government. And he, at some point, he actually studied in the United States. He is very cosmopolitan. He grew up in many countries because his father, at one point, was a political exile under President Sukarno, and so Prabowo had lived in the West also, in Europe, also in some Asian countries. So and he has served a distinguished military career, which ended abruptly when Suharto fell down from power. Prabowo himself was accused of some wrongdoing, some involvement in human rights abuses. His role in East Timor as a commander there, and also during the kidnapping of activists, there was some accusations leveled against Prabowo. He left the country for a while, but he came back and became a political player. He established a political party. He also became a businessman, and he contested elections first as a running mate. He was brought by Megawati as her running mate for VP in the elections in 2004, if I'm not mistaken, against President SBY, or is it 2009? I've forgotten. And then he ran twice against Joko Widodo, 2014, 2019. At the time, he was seen as someone who was very much a firebrand, very much an antithesis to Jokowi. Jokowi is seen as a very common man, someone with no elite pedigree, while Prabowo was very much part of the Jakarta establishment, both from his own family background. His grandfather was the one who set up one of the biggest state-owned bank, the Bank Negara Indonesia. So that was his grandfather established it. So very, very much establishment figure, and he was seen very much. He was seen very much an antithesis to what Jokowi stood for.
Very interesting.
Interestingly, Prabowo lost twice to Jokowi, and now he won the 2024 election as the anointed successor of President Joko Widodo, someone who promised to continue Jokowi's legacy, because Jokowi brought Prabowo into his cabinet after the very polarizing presidential election of 2019. Jokowi embraced Prabowo by bringing him into the cabinet, and Prabowo was appointed as a Minister of Defense.
Fascinating. It's with that kind of a history, I'm sure that he has strong links on the American side with the military and otherwise. Well, thanks for that. I wanted to ask you, how is the U.S. presidential campaign being viewed in Indonesia? And of course, America is some distance away from Indonesia, but I'm just curious how the average Indonesians are viewing the matchup here.
Well, I have to be frank. Unlike in many other countries, particularly in the number of countries which are allies of the United States, are now really, really anxiously watching the outcomes of the forthcoming U.S. presidential elections. The Indonesian public has been pretty preoccupied with our own elections, the transition from President Joko Widodo to President Prabowo, his cabinet appointment, and the various activities that the president has been doing, including doing a boot camp for all his new ministers and vice ministers, bringing all of those very large numbers of ministers and vice ministers to the military academy in Magelang. So frankly, U.S. elections are not really making much headlines in Indonesia at the moment. We have not really found too many articles being devoted to the U.S. elections at the moment. So I'm sorry about that, Sawa.
Well, listen, we in America are always guilty, including me, of thinking the world revolves around America, that everyone thinks about this as breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And of course, that is not the case. So thank you for verifying that. I wanted to ask you, just switching the topics a little bit, that recently the so-called BRICS grouping, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, met in Kazan under the chairmanship of Mr. Putin, the president of Russia. What is your view about the importance of the BRICS grouping, Dewi?
Yeah, BRICS has been an interesting development. In the beginning, it was seen as a grouping of countries within G20 that was a counter to the G7. The new emerging economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, then South Africa. At one point, Indonesia was added to the eye. The BRICS.
Yes.
But I remember in the beginning, Indonesia was not that interested to be part of BRICS. Indonesia formed a grouping of middle powers within the G20. It's called MICTA: Mexico, Indonesia, Turkey, South Korea, Australia. Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, and Australia. And there have been rumors throughout the Jokowi government that Indonesia would be joining BRICS. In fact, President Joko Widodo attended the BRICS summit in South Africa. But in fact, Indonesia said, we support the BRICS desire to promote a more equitable international order, an international order where newer countries, big countries like Brazil, India, would have greater say.
Right.
Try to reform the UN Security Council, which is regarded as, this is quite outdated. The permanent members of the Security Council are not necessarily the most significant players in the international system anymore, because this is really the victors of Second World War, while the world has changed, since 1945.
Yes.
So there are so many new countries emerging, and that the international system should reflect that. And one of the ambition of the global South, not just BRICS. BRICS sees itself as a grouping of prominent countries from the global South, trying to elevate the concerns of the global South. And Indonesia has always been part of this developing world and promoting the interests of the global South. But until recently, Indonesia was not interested to be formally joining the BRICS, as a formal member. But I was frankly quite surprised when the first foreign meeting that the Indonesian new foreign minister Sugiono, who is very close to President Prabowo, Dr. Sugiono, attended the summit in Kazan, and then announced that Indonesia is interested in joining BRICS.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so this is I don't know whether there seems to be a slight shift from Jokowi's more equivocal approach towards BRICS.
Let me just take a moment to remind our viewers that Polaris-Live is entirely viewer-supported. We'd appreciate your signing up to our mailing list at kashmiri.com and to our YouTube channel. Now, there's no cost, but it really does help us. Now, I want to, as you know, Dewi, Polaris-Live is driven by its belief that the relationship between China and the United States is the most consequential relationship in the world today when it comes to impact on economy, peace, war, and especially countries like Indonesia, which are very large democracies with cultures that are different. And we are focused very tightly on bettering the relations, finding ways to better relations between China and the US. It's at the heart of what we do. So I want to ask you, if you got a chance to speak privately and individually to President Xi Jinping of China and whoever is elected as the next president of the US, what are some of the recommendations that you would make to each one of them for specific actions to reduce tensions between the two major powers? I know it's blue sky, but it's important for me to ask you this.
Well, I think, for coming from Indonesia, and I like here to echo President Prabowo previously when he was Minister of Defense. He reiterated a number of times that both the United States and China are great civilizations. They have contributed a lot to the progress of humankind, and both countries have responsibility. Both are great powers, and they have great responsibility to ensure the international peace and stability and prosperity. So I would like to call, of course, if I have a chance to speak to President Xi Jinping and whoever is coming next to President of the United States, that they know that they need to take a pause and think very seriously about, the real danger of open conflicts if the rhetorics and the various actions and escalating tensions between the two countries are not managed properly. I do not think that Beijing, Washington really want to go into open conflict with each other. And if they do go into open conflict with each other, the very likely area of conflict for them will be in East Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia. And we in Southeast Asia do not want to be another theater of great power conflict. So it's very important that they be willing to sit back and exercise some restraint, and maybe really talk heart to heart about what are the red lines for both countries, which are truly non-negotiable, and maybe make sure that each side is conscious about not really pushing the boundaries too much over the red lines. But on the other hand, what are the issues in which both countries have equal responsibility to work together over our global commons? The issues of climate change, the issues of food security, of energy security, the issues of so many other conflicts in many parts of the world. That if we do not scale that back, there is a real risk of that opening into an open conflict. So I would say, sit back and really think about what is really non-negotiable and red line, and what are the areas of possible cooperation. And that when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region, both countries need to ensure that they do not use the other countries, the small and middle powers, as simply pawns. We have agency. ASEAN has its centrality and agency, and we want to ensure our strategic autonomy. We want to work with both countries. We do not want to be forced to choose one or the other. And the stability of Southeast Asia is in fact in the interest of both China and the United States. And we want to ensure that the actions of both countries do not really lead to open and escalating and open conflicts, which may be easy to provoke, but not that easy to end.
Well, you make an important point that we tend to forget, those of us who live in America, and certainly I'm sure those who are in China, that if conflict does break out, it will be the countries of your region, the Indo-Pacific region, that will be right in the middle of it. And so it's important from these. But I'm going to pursue that just a little bit longer. It would seem as though everything you've said is so much common sense. That's what ought to be happening. Because in a sense, if there's war, both are nuclear-powered wars, and the world will probably, civilization will end. There's nothing that we're going to have to worry about in that case. But it seems so obvious what you said should be done, should be done. Is there one reason that comes to your mind why China and America are not doing it?
I think both are just continuing to do brinkmanship, knowing, I think that China doesn't want to go to the United States, and I don't think the United States wants to be engaged in another Asian war. But they continue to push the envelope at these times. I think China blames the US, and the US blames China.
Exactly.
But I think, to be fair here, China is testing the US. China is trying to push China is becoming much more aggressive, more assertive in the East China Sea and the South China Sea.
Right.
Trying, in fact, China is already trying de facto to occupy the South China Sea, to change the reality on the ground, and making it a fait accompli. And the United States, clearly, the United States is a global power. The United States needs freedom of navigation. One of the reasons it is probably not ratified UNCLOS is because of concerns about that. But I would argue that the US's claim that it is a champion of international law, and that it is carrying out freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea as a measure of its respect for UNCLOS, is being weakened, undermined, as long as the United States is still not ratified UNCLOS. If you respect the international law so much, then you should be part of it. You cannot simply say, well, China is a party to it, but it's not respecting it. We are not a party to it, but we are respecting it. If you respect it so much, then there should be a party to it, so that that it would strengthen the case. But in this case, I would argue that the US here has the right, and I think that I would like to see that not just the US but other international partners also show that freedom of navigation needs to be respected, and that UNCLOS 1982 is the only constitution of the sea that should guidelines the activities. And therefore, when it comes to China trying to use its increasingly enormous military capability, as well as enormous economic influence, by maybe trying to coerce Southeast Asian countries just to accept its presence in South China Sea. In this case, I think that we do look to the United States. I mean, it is not a coincidence that Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries are all engaged in hedging. So very close economic relations with China. But at the same time, Indonesia is a non-aligned country, but it has very close security cooperation with the United States. And its joint military exercises, called the Garuda Shield, has become multilateral now. It's called Super Garuda Shield. So, and I think that is a reaction, concerns about our geostrategic environment.
Well, wisely said. And I think back again to what is said in American military circles, that yes, America is not ratifying the treaty, but we follow it. But China has ratified it and seems not to follow it. But that's an argument for a different time. Dewi Fortuna Anwar, we have alas run out of time. But I want to thank you very, very much for this instructive conversation. It's always a pleasure and education to talk with you. And I hope that we can count on you again to come back at a later time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sawa.
And thank you also to our listeners from around the world. This has been another program in our series focusing on China, United States, and the fast-growing economies around the world. Come see us again. Until then, goodbye.